Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're not just hearing about medieval feasting, you're living it. Not from the high table, not in some polished fantasy with harp music and perfectly carved turkey legs. No, you're arriving as a nobody, a half-invited, half-forgotten, distant relation, with just enough status to get a seat, and not enough to get served quickly. Before we begin this long, greasy descent into spectacle, shame, and slow-motion indigestion, go ahead and like and subscribe, but only if you enjoy falling asleep to soft voices describing very hard times. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fun to see who's tuning in. Now settle in, get comfortable, and prepare to spend one long, uncomfortable evening surrounded by roast boars, jellied eels, jugglers with head trauma, and nobles who eat like gods and digest like goats. Welcome to the feast. You don't so much receive an invitation as get told, by a steward in passing, as if it were a punishment. A feast, he says, a celebration. Everyone will be there, even you. You nod like it's normal, like you're accustomed to being summoned to halls full of nobility and roasted animals. You are not. Your tunic is borrowed, too tight at the shoulders, too loose at the waist, and smelling faintly of old onions. Your boots squeak with every step, like they're trying to confess something. You do your best to walk like someone important. It doesn't work. You arrive at the Great Hall half an hour early because you weren't told when to show up and figured being early was better than being noticed. Inside, the place is already filling. Nobles in embroidered robes, merchants trying not to look impressed, priests murmuring judgment into their wine. The fire roars at the far end of the room. The smell hits you immediately. Meat, sweat, wood smoke, and something sickly sweet, like stewed fruit left out in the sun. It's beautiful. It's horrible. You take it in all at once. You're pointed toward a bench, not too close to the hearth, not too far from the doors, just enough to be forgotten. Your trencher is already waiting, a slab of stale bread meant to soak up whatever lands on it. The high table is still empty. You exhale slowly, adjust your sleeves, and try to look like you've done this before. You haven't, but no one has called you out yet. That feels like a win. You don't make it to your bench right away. Before your backside can even approach the splintered wood of your designated seating, a harried servant grabs your elbow and mutters, "You here, hold this." A heavy jug is shoved into your hands without explanation. You look at it like it might explode. It smells faintly of boiled barley and something that died a week ago. You wonder if you've just been conscripted into brewing or funerals. You're too stunned to protest and too unsure of your social standing to risk saying no. So you follow, through a narrow side door, down a low-ceilinged hallway lined with smudged torch brackets and stale air. The noise begins before you see anything. Clanging, shouting, the shriek of metal on metal, and the unmistakable sound of something wet hitting stone. Then you're there, the kitchen. It's less a room and more a furnace someone built walls around. The heat hits first, thick and immediate, like stepping into the mouth of a dragon with poor impulse control. Fires roar from brick ovens and spit pits. The air is a smoky soup of rendered fat, scorched herbs, sweat, and panic. You're instantly drenched. Your tunic begins to wilt. The space is absolute chaos. Dozens of bodies dart between prep tables, hearths, cauldrons, and slabs of meat that look like they were hacked off a beast that fought back. Cooks shout instructions over one another in a dialect composed entirely of curses and threats. There's a woman slicing onions so quickly her fingers are a blur, and a boy in the corner desperately trying to keep a basket of live crabs from escaping across the floor. He is losing. A massive iron pot boils over next to you, and no one reacts. A pig, fully intact, eyes closed like it died mid-nap, is being shaved with a blade the size of your forearm. Two men are stuffing something unidentifiable into its belly, while arguing over whether it should include raisins. Nearby, someone's dropped a bowl of eggs, and the floor is now a battlefield of yolk and shattered pottery. You try to stay out of the way, but the jug you're holding is apparently in the way. A red-faced man with forearms like tree trunks barks. You move or bleed. You move immediately into another man who slaps your shoulder with a grease-slick rag and mutters, "You're leaking." You don't know what he means and you don't want to ask. The cook, the commander of this culinary hell, stands in the centre like a sun about which all madness orbits. He's huge, bald and steaming in his own sweat. His apron is stained with a palette of sauces and blood, his sleeves rolled up to elbows that might as well be clubs. He sees you. He does not like what he sees. "What in God's crusty undergarments is that?" he growls, pointing a ladle at your face like a weapon. You hold up the jug, sheepish. "I was told to—" "Not here," he roars. "This is a feast, not a piss parlour. That goes to the butler's hall." You nod, pivot, and begin walking in what you hope is the direction of the butler's hall. You pass a table where someone is flambeing a pastry, another where 4 birds are being delicately redressed in their own feathers. The result is equal parts majestic and deeply unsettling, like an avian funeral with snacks. One cook is working on a tower of jelly moulded into the shape of a castle. It wobbles when you breathe near it. You back away quickly. Then, with absolutely no warning, a ladle whips past your head and strikes the wall behind you with a clang. You don't know if it was aimed at you or someone else. You also don't stick around to find out. You stumble out through another side door, heart pounding, hands still sticky with something that might be honey or pig mucus. You squint into the cooler air of the corridor beyond, grateful for the drop in temperature and the sudden absence of animal screams. The jug is still with you, and you have no idea where it was supposed to go, but you set it gently on the floor and decide it's no longer your concern. You lean against the stone wall and take a breath that smells faintly of turnips and old soap. Your clothes are clinging to you in new and unflattering ways. Your palms are shiny. There is flour in your eyebrows. You were in the kitchen for maybe 10 minutes. You feel like you've aged a year. Eventually, you make your way back toward the Great Hall, trying to look as though you were simply inspecting something very important and not just nearly murdered by cookware. No one seems to notice your absence, which is both a relief and a minor insult. The feast hasn't even started yet, and already you've survived the kitchen. Barely. You finally find your seat. It's not marked, of course. There are no little cards, no helpful signs, just a silent social geometry you're expected to divine through osmosis. The steward's earlier instructions echo in your head. 3rd bench down, left side, near the hearth, and after a brief detour through someone's wine jug and a close brush with a carved boar's head, you land in the spot that seems designed for people like you. Not a guest of honour, not a servant, but something in between. Tolerated. Your bench is long, shared, and slightly sticky. The table in front of it is wide and uneven, covered in a linen cloth that's seen better decades. There's already a trencher waiting, a thick slab of stale bread hollowed out to catch juices, crumbs, and your dignity. The crust is dense enough to cause dental injury, and the smell is halfway between yeast and the back of a horse. You place your hands beside it like you know what you're doing and adjust your posture, so your shoulders suggest you've sat at better tables than this. You haven't. You're surrounded by others who also haven't. On your left is a merchant's son, judging by his attempt at a beard and the crushed velvet doublet that's just a little too ambitious for his status. On your right sits a clerk's or something like it, who keeps giggling under his breath at jokes no one's told. Further down the bench is a man with deeply unfortunate skin and a codpiece he adjusts every time someone looks away. He's doing it now. You pretend not to notice. Across from you, a group of minor gentry are pretending they don't know each other, while very obviously trying to outnod one another in greeting. One of them has a hat with a feather so large it nearly brushes the sconces on the wall. Another is dabbing at invisible dust on his goblet with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb. Everyone's eyes keep drifting back toward the high table, like worshippers at a very tense mass. The high table, elevated and over-decorated, is slowly being filled. The lord of the manor has taken his seat, a wide, brooding man with a robe lined in fur and a forehead that suggests frequent frowning. Beside him sits his wife, whose expression has not changed in 10 minutes, and who looks at the roasted pheasant in front of her like it personally insulted her family. Lesser nobles, cousins, and high-ranking clergy trickle in around them, murmuring and bowing and smirking in that strange rotational dance of medieval hierarchy. There is an unspoken code to this seating arrangement, a language of elbows and eye contact, of who reaches for what and how fast. You already know you don't speak it fluently. Everyone is watching everyone else's hands, how they hold their knives, where their goblets sit, whether they chew too long or not long enough. A wrong move here won't get you killed, probably, but it might get you laughed at, demoted, or quietly uninvited to every important event until you die of embarrassment. You adjust your sleeves and try to breathe as if that's normal. One of the serving boys appears with a pitcher of weak wine and begins filling goblets along the bench. He skips no one, but the angle of the pour speaks volumes. The merchant's son receives a generous swirl. You get half a cup. The man with the codpiece gets a drop and a grunt. You wonder what he did. The clerk beside you leans in suddenly. They say the king might show, he whispers, eyes wide, as if he's just revealed a plot. You nod solemnly, as if you have an opinion about that, and then immediately regret nodding, because you have no idea how to look interested without looking desperate. You take a sip of your wine and nearly gag. It's sour and faintly woody, like someone aged it in a broken cart. More food begins to arrive. Not for you, not yet, but for the high table. Gleaming trays carried by red-faced servants, platters piled high with things that steam and shimmer and twitch slightly. You spot a roast swan redressed in its own feathers, a jelly mould in the shape of a cathedral, and what looks like an eel coiled in a circle, its head still attached and eyes disappointingly open. You try not to stare, but you also try not to blink. It's all happening very quickly. Another server slides a trencher in front of someone nearby and mutters, "Don't touch the sauce until the prayer." You nod automatically, even though he wasn't speaking to you. Everyone else nods too. It's a shared ritual of confusion. You realise, abruptly, that no one has actually told you the rules. There's no list of etiquette, no printed guide. You're supposed to know when to eat, when to speak, how to hold your knife without implying insult. You glance around for a pattern. Everyone seems to be waiting for something. A toast, a bell, a divine sign. You grip your goblet too tightly and pretend to be very interested in the wall behind the clerk's head. The noise in the room hums low and tense. Laughter spikes here and there. Small, deliberate, strategic. People testing the mood. The steward reappears, this time near the front, and claps his hands once. It's not loud, but it cuts through the murmur. A prayer, then. You bow your head because everyone else does, mumbling words you hope are close enough to Latin not to draw attention. When you look up again, the room has shifted. A few guests are eating now, cautiously. Others are still waiting. The man across from you takes a single bite of something yellow and visibly regrets it. Someone belches from 3 benches down. The merchant's son smirks and lifts his goblet in your general direction, like you've shared a joke. You haven't. Still, you raise yours back, carefully. It's better to seem like you're part of something than admit you're not. You sip again and try not to wince. The food hasn't reached your end of the table yet. It will. Eventually. You hope. In the meantime, you fold your hands neatly, rest your wrists on the table's edge like you saw a baron do once, and try to radiate the quiet confidence of a man who knows what's coming. You don't. But if you pretend hard enough, maybe no one else will notice. You haven't taken a bite yet, but you're already fairly certain you've committed at least 3 unforgivable sins. Maybe 4, if the steward's glare counted as a verdict. Everything here is a trap. A ritual disguised as dinner. A minefield dressed in roasted duck and perfumed apples. You were told this was a feast. No one mentioned it was also a test. It starts with the salt, or rather, the placement of it. You don't notice at first, but you're seated below the salt, a long, elegant dish placed at the centre of the table to divide the people who matter from the people who serve to fill space. You are very much on the wrong side of it. You reach toward it casually, trying to season the bit of cabbage someone just slapped onto your trencher, only to catch the eyes of 3 different people at once, all of them aghast. One looks personally wounded. You pull your hand back like it brushed a flame. The cabbage remains unseasoned. So does your social standing. Then it's the bread. You'd heard the word trencher before, but assumed it was just a fancy term for plate. It is not. It's bread, functional bread. Bread that absorbs gravy, grease, and judgment. You are supposed to wait, not just until the prayer, but until someone of higher status has begun eating theirs, signalling that it's now safe for the rest of the peasants to nibble. You didn't. You pinched a corner, just a little, because your stomach growled and the smell of poultry fat was making you dizzy. Now the merchant's son next to you is side-eyeing you like you licked the bishop's knife. You rest your hands in your lap and pretend you're fasting by choice. Speaking of bishops, one of them just coughed. Not once, repeatedly, in a damp and theatrical way that makes the table quietly recoil. It's not that coughing is forbidden, but it's a reminder that no matter how perfumed or gilded this setting might be, everyone's still made of meat and mucus. Someone whispers that it's a humour imbalance, and another insists it's the eels. You hope it's the eels, though that somehow feels worse. Your goblet is suddenly refilled by a passing servant who moves with the speed and subtlety of a ghost. You nod politely, which was a mistake, because nobles don't nod at servants, they ignore them. You're not supposed to acknowledge the help unless you're issuing instructions, and even then, only if someone important is watching. You place the goblet down quickly and hope it doesn't count as a greeting. Across from you, a woman with sleeves like curtains carefully dabs her lips. After taking the tiniest sip of wine known to man, her face remains unchanged. She's been doing this for decades. You realise you've been staring and look away quickly, straight into the glare of someone slicing their meat with such precision you wonder if it's a form of communication. You smile in apology. That was another mistake. There are rules here, and none of them have been explained. Don't lean on the table. Don't use your knife to point. Don't speak with food in your mouth, but also don't sit silently for too long, or you'll seem sullen. Never reach across someone else's plate unless you want to imply they're beneath you. And never, under any circumstance, lick your fingers. Not even discreetly. Especially not discreetly. Discretion suggests you knew it was wrong. You try to recall something you overheard once, that proper diners dab grease from their lips with the inside of their sleeve, not the outside. The idea is to show respect without ruining the embroidery. You glance at your own sleeve, which is already damp from something mysterious in the kitchen, and decide against experimenting. The first course finally arrives, carried by servants, in a line like a funeral procession. There's meat, vegetables, sauces in questionable colours. Someone announces it in a booming voice, and a few guests make a show of applauding the effort. You hesitate before reaching for anything. The bishop is still coughing. A pie is set down in front of the high table, steaming and golden. The crust cracks open to reveal birds, live ones. They flap out in confusion, one of them crashing directly into the Lord's goblet. No one screams, no one laughs. This is apparently normal. You do your best to pretend that something flying out of your food wouldn't make you leave the room. Someone at the table begins loudly telling a story about a prior feast, something involving a drunken friar, a crossbow, and a wheel of cheese. You chuckle lightly, then realise no one else is laughing. They're listening, yes, but politely. You've misjudged the moment. Again, you cough into your hand and take another cautious sip of wine. By this point, you're starving. You have food in front of you now, an appetizer of sorts, something resembling duck or perhaps unlucky goose. But you can't figure out when it's acceptable to start eating it. You cut a small piece with your knife, watching the edges of the room like a soldier waiting for a signal. A noblewoman 2 benches up takes a bite. That's your chance. You raise your knife, and take a mouthful. It's cold and greasy and vaguely metallic, but it's food. You chew with exaggerated calm, pretending you don't notice the crunch in the middle that might be cartilage or might be evidence that this bird had a long and difficult life. You place your knife down at what you hope is the correct angle, slightly across the trench, blade inward, like you read in that battered etiquette book, once owned by someone wealthier than you. You glance to your left. The merchant's son is watching. You nod faintly. He nods back. For once, it feels like you did something right. Then the man across from you sneezes directly into his goblet, and the moment is over. It begins with trumpets. Of course it does. Not loud ones, more of a nasal blast like someone trying to summon enthusiasm through an ox horn. Everyone at the table straightens slightly. Conversations hush. The real show is about to begin. A line of servants marches in carrying silver platters that shimmer in the torchlight like mythical artifacts. From a distance, it's magnificent. A parade of roasted beasts, stacked pies, and towers of moulded jelly that jiggle with a menacing grace. At the high table, there are oohs and a few scattered claps. Someone murmurs, "Ah, the lampreys." No one seems concerned by that statement, which should have been a warning. The first dish placed in front of you is indeed lamprey, a sort of parasitic jawed eel, boiled, roasted, or possibly exercised before arriving on your plate. It stares up at you, literally, because the head is still attached, its circular mouth full of tiny grasping teeth curled in on itself like it died screaming. You stab it politely with your knife. The flesh gives way with a damp resistance, like carving through wet parchment. You take a bite. It's oily, metallic, and deeply wrong in a way your ancestors would have recognized as a divine warning. You chew because you don't know what else to do. Then comes the eel in aspic. You'd heard of aspic, vaguely, some kind of savoury jelly, but had never truly internalized the idea of fish suspended in gelatin. It glistens, like an embalming accident. You manage one bite before your body protests. The texture alone is a betrayal. Cold, rubbery, and possessed of a flavour that tastes like low tide and regret. Across the table, a clerk eats his with enthusiasm. You watch him carefully for signs of madness. Next is something the servant announces as hedgehog stew, although it could easily be anything that once had legs and made noise. It's grey, it's steaming, and it smells faintly of burnt thyme and hair. You notice the merchant's son poke it cautiously, as though it might still bite. You decide to follow his lead and simply shift the stew around your plate until it looks like you tried. The high table, meanwhile, is putting on a performance. The lord gestures grandly as a roast swan is carried in, its wings reattached and posed as if mid-flight. The skin is lacquered, the beak gilded, the eyes replaced with polished beads. It's unclear if anyone plans to eat it or if it's just there to intimidate the peasants. A servant cuts into it with ceremony. You hear bones crack and someone sigh in satisfaction. Another servant rushes by, nearly upending a tray of boiled cabbage. The smell follows in his wake like a curse. It lands somewhere near the bishop, who does not blink. You, however, find your appetite shrinking further into the corners of your stomach. Then comes the goose pie. It's brought out like a wedding cake, tall, crusted in egg wash, decorated with herbs and alarming confidence. The servant sets it down in front of a table of minor nobles, and the room watches with interest. You hear a few murmurs. Last time they used pigeons, remember, when it caught fire? The pie is cut. There is a pause. Then, with an audible flap, a goose launches out of the middle. Alive, it honks once, looks wildly around the room, and takes off toward the rafters, trailing crust and panic. Several guests applaud, one faints. The lord's wife doesn't even blink. Apparently, this is entertainment. More dishes arrive, each one stranger than the last. Something moulded into a fish, but definitely not made of fish. A tower of cheese that sweats visibly. Trays of game birds arranged in erotic positions. A pudding that quivers like it knows what's coming. You poke at everything, smile at nothing, and chew only when absolutely necessary. Then comes the rennet pudding. You'd like to believe it's a joke, yeah, some medieval test of courage, but no one else seems surprised. It's off-white, congealed, and jiggles slightly when disturbed. The taste is sour, with the texture of phlegm and the emotional impact of a confession. You swallow it out of fear. The bishop coughs again. You begin to consider the benefits of starvation. Throughout it all, no one stops eating. No one complains. The clerk beside you is gnawing on what might be a rabbit's leg. The merchant's son has started on the lamprey again, as if it's improved with exposure to air. You look down at your plate and try to remember what food used to be. By now, your goblet has been refilled multiple times, each top-off accompanied by an increasingly impatient servant. You've stopped trying to gauge the strength of the wine. It's strong enough to make your fingertips tingle, but not strong enough to make you forget what aspic tastes like. The room is louder now, full. Heat swirls near the ceiling with the smoke, and you can feel the sweat gathering at your back. The walls are flickering with torchlight. The laughter is sharper, more forced. Someone down the bench drops a trencher and curses under their breath. Someone else toasts to our noble host, and everyone echoes it automatically, like a choir of trained prisoners. You take another bite of something that might be tripe and feel your soul leave your body for a moment. Just a moment. Then it returns, disappointed. By the time the first course ends, your stomach is half full of mystery and half full of dread. You've eaten things you don't recognize and can't forget. You've watched animals emerge from pastries. You've seen nobles nod solemnly while gnawing on goose feet, and you still have more courses to go. You wipe your mouth with the inside of your sleeve, like someone told you once was proper, and settle back onto your bench. Someone near you belches. Someone else laughs too loudly. You close your eyes for a second, and the worst is probably over. You are wrong. You've long since given up trying to understand what's on your own plate. Between the gelatinous bird parts and the unidentifiable stew that might contain antlers, you've reached a kind of numb detachment. So you do what everyone eventually does at a medieval feast once their stomach hits its limit. You watch the high table. It's raised above the rest of the room on a wooden dais, grand and severe, like a stage built for a tragedy no one dares acknowledge. And sitting at the centre of that stage is the king. He doesn't eat, not really. He prods at a stuffed peacock, its iridescent feathers reattached, its beak frozen in mid-screech. The skin gleams like polished lacquer, and the eyes are replaced with blackened glass beads. It's ceremonial, you suspect, symbolic. Not food so much as a warning, or maybe a trophy. He takes a bite, just one, then sets the knife down and dabs at his mouth with a cloth that probably cost more than your father's entire flock. The food that reaches him has already been tasted, once by a servant, once by the royal taster, and possibly once by a terrified monk with a strong sense of duty and a weak constitution. Every goblet is pre-sipped, every plate is observed. It's hard not to wonder what it would be like to live in a world where every meal might be your last, not from dysentery, but from intentional murder by someone with enough wine and a grudge. The king wears a robe so heavy with embroidery and fur it could clothe a village. The sleeves alone would house 3 people. He shifts under its weight, not quite fidgeting, but adjusting in that way a man does when he's regretting decisions. Around his neck is a chain, thick enough to serve as a weapon. Gold, encrusted with gems that glitter every time he moves, or pretends to. Beside him is the queen, motionless. Her gown is impossibly tight, cinched in a way that must physically prevent full breaths. She has not blinked in half an hour. You know because you've been watching. She smiles occasionally, the kind of slow rehearsed smile that suggests she was taught it as a child and hasn't updated the expression since. A platter is placed in front of her. Quail eggs, nested in sugared almonds, arranged like tiny graves. She does not eat. The lords and ladies seated beside them are louder than necessary. Everything they say is followed by a laugh, and every laugh is followed by a glance toward the king, as if awaiting approval. No one wants to be the one who spoke when he frowned. No one wants to be the one who didn't laugh if he smiled. It's like watching wolves compliment each other's fur while pretending not to smell blood. A jester scuttles up to the dais, does a small backflip, and presents what appears to be a turnip carved into the shape of a monk. The king smiles faintly. The jester lives another day. At your end of the hall, the mood is different. People eat because they're hungry. At the high table, they perform hunger. Every bite is choreographed. Every pause is loaded with meaning. When the king lifts his goblet, everyone lifts theirs. When he puts it down, they all pretend they were already done. You get the feeling that if he sneezed, 3 bishops would declare it a miracle. He raises a toast, slowly. He doesn't say much, just a few words about honour, loyalty, the divine right of kings, the usual. Everyone cheers too loudly. You raise your own goblet, a second behind the others, and spill wine on your lap in the process. It burns. You do not react. Watching them eat, or not eat, is exhausting. They seem less like people, and more like wax figures rehearsing human behaviour. The queen lifts a spoonful of something red and glistening to her lips, then sets it down without tasting it. Her gaze never leaves the far wall. You wonder if she's trying to remember the last time she actually enjoyed a meal, or if she's counting down the hours until she can unlace her corset and breathe again. The nobles beside her are locked in a game of subtle warfare. One lifts a pheasant leg too quickly and is met with a flicker of disdain from the woman beside him. Another takes too long to answer a toast and spends the next 5 minutes smiling too hard at everyone who walks by. Their meals are less about nourishment and more about survival. You catch yourself wondering what it must be like to live like that, surrounded by abundance, crushed by expectation. Every robe a statement, every glance a risk. You can't decide if it's terrifying or simply stupid. A steward approaches the king with a plate of what looks like moulded jelly in the shape of a castle. The king pokes it once, then nods. The steward bows and scuttles away. A moment later, 3 more of the same jelly castles appear at the surrounding tables, as if this one flick of approval had triggered a chain reaction of copycat culinary pageantry. Eventually, the king does eat. Something soft, spoon-fed by a man whose entire existence is probably dedicated to keeping track of how many chews His Majesty prefers. The queen eats nothing. The nobles nibble cautiously, their eyes always tracking one another. A bishop makes a joke about roast relics. Someone snorts wine through their nose. The king smiles again. It's unclear if it's genuine or gas. Back at your bench, the food has gone cold. Not that it was ever hot, but at least now you're aware of the contrast. You tear a hunk from your trencher and dip it in whatever gravy remains. It's gluey, bland, safe. You chew and watch the high table, like it's a puppet show, one where everyone involved is both puppeteer and prisoner. You remind yourself that this is supposed to be an honour, that you're lucky to be here, that some people live their entire lives without ever seeing the king eat spoon-mashed pigeon next to a woman impersonating a statue. You take another bite. It's not the best theatre you've seen, but at least it's free. You've managed to avoid direct human interaction for nearly an hour, which feels like an achievement. You've nodded at the appropriate moments, chuckled when others chuckled, and only dropped your goblet once, and it was empty, so it hardly counts. But now, as you cautiously prod at what might be pigeon pudding, someone turns toward you and speaks. Fine vintage, isn't it? You blink, swallow, mentally run through every possible response. The man beside you is wearing a tunic too fine for a commoner, not fine enough for nobility. His sleeves are embroidered, but unevenly. A gift from someone with influence, perhaps. He looks around your age, but infinitely more comfortable, like he's attended feasts since the cradle. He lifts his goblet again and gives you a nod of camaraderie. You manage to say, "It tastes red." There's a moment of silence, then blessedly, he laughs. Not loudly, but politely. He swirls the wine and agrees. It does at that. You exhale so hard your bones slump. The conversation continues, but mercifully, it shifts back to his other neighbour, a plump merchant's daughter, with a fan and a voice sharp enough to pare apples. You listen just enough to nod convincingly. You're safe, for now. But the room is warming, from wine, from bodies, from the fire, and with that heat comes boldness. People are talking more, louder, looser. The wine flows more freely, which is ironic, since the food is now congealing into something less chewable by the minute. It's not long before someone at the middle table stands up. A toast, and of course, toasts in a medieval feast aren't brief acknowledgements. They're performances, equal parts diplomacy, boasting, and barely disguised threats. This one is long, florid, and mostly in Latin, which no one below the salt understands, but everyone pretends to appreciate. The man finishes with a flourish and drains his goblet. A cheer rises. You join in half a second late. Then a second toast begins, this time from a baron who begins by praising the king, then detours into a 5-minute anecdote about swine breeding, before landing on an oddly specific metaphor involving oaths and wine barrels. You laugh when others do, though you're not entirely sure why. You just hope it wasn't about the Queen. Each toast is an opportunity to show loyalty, to assert dominance, or, if you're ambitious and dangerously drunk, to insult your rival so indirectly that they can't challenge you to a duel without sounding stupid. The real professionals lace their speeches with compliments so sharp you can feel the blood under the flattery. You raise your goblet when everyone else does, but once, just once, you raise it too late. By the time your arm's in the air, the toast has ended, and instead of honouring the king, you appear to be saluting the man across from you, who happens to be scratching his ear with a knife. He pauses, looks at you. You grin awkwardly. He nods once and resumes eating. You pray it wasn't an oath of fealty. A servant passes again, refilling goblets with terrifying precision. You try to decline, but he's already moved on. Your cup brims with a new pour, darker than before. Stronger, too. You take a cautious sip and feel your vision briefly shimmer. Someone behind you begins to sing. Not well, but passionately. A few others join in. A garbled chant about St. Cuthbert and goose fat. The words are slurred, the melody is unstable, and the effect is contagious. People start clapping along. You fake a cough and sip more wine. Next to you, the minor baron's nephew leans back and murmurs, "This is the part where things get fluid." You nod, though you're unsure what he means. A man to your left just tried to cut a loaf of bread with his belt knife and lost half his sleeve. The bishop is slumped slightly to the right, eyes closed, either praying or asleep. And someone near the dais just began a third toast, this one about the moral purity of swans. The laughter becomes less measured. The conversations overlap, forming a din thick enough to wade through. Someone bumps your shoulder. You turn, smile, and realise you've just smiled at a woman too far above your station for it to be safe. She raises one eyebrow and turns away. Your ears burn. Toasts continue. Now they're less about honour and more about daring. One man praises the unmatched virtue of the host's hunting dogs. Another claims his cousin once outdrank a bishop and still hit a boar at 50 paces. You try not to laugh too hard. Humour at someone else's expense is only funny until it becomes a grudge. There's a lull. Someone important clears their throat. A final toast. It's the king. His voice is slow and heavy, each syllable deliberate. You hang on every word, not because it's interesting, it isn't, but because everyone else does, and missing your cue could be fatal. He praises the food, the faith, the gathering of old allies and new enemies, though he doesn't use the word enemies exactly. Just those whose swords know not yet where to point, which is somehow worse. You raise your goblet along with everyone else, this time in time. The wine hits your gut like a sermon, long and confusing. Your stomach churns in protest, but you smile again, faintly, carefully, and tap your goblet once on the table. You've survived another round. Socially, you're still alive. Someone sneezes wine across the table. A servant slips on a bone. A toast erupts in the far corner. Unclear to whom, but it involves a chant and possibly a dare. You watch it all unfold, and quietly pray that dessert is more forgiving than the conversation. But you know better. This is only halfway through the meal, and things are about to get stranger. You're not entirely sure when the food stops and the show begins. There's no clear line, no bell, no curtain, no formal declaration of intermission. One moment, someone is gnawing on a pheasant leg. The next, a jester is cartwheeling through the spilled gravy. Maybe this is the digestion phase. Maybe it's the descent. The jester is short, wiry, and clad in bells that jingle with every contortion of his body. His hat flops like a wilted flower. His teeth are far too white. He leaps onto a bench and begins mimicking the bishop's blessing from earlier. Hands raised, eyes crossed, spouting gibberish Latin while smacking himself in the head with a wooden spoon. Half the room erupts in laughter. The bishop does not. You laugh too, mostly because everyone else is. You're not even sure it's funny. Maybe it is. Maybe it's the wine. Maybe it's the collective release of tension. After the etiquette, the toasts, the meat-based identity crises, finally something you're not expected to participate in. The jester somersaults onto a table, kicks over a bowl of plums, and farts with theatrical flourish. Someone drops their goblet in delight. Then the bear arrives. No one introduces it. There's no trumpet, no handler announcement, just a sound, a heavy dragging clink of chain. And suddenly, there it is. A massive shaggy beast with bored eyes and a harness too tight across its chest. It lumbers in like it owns the place, which for the next few minutes, it absolutely does. The bear is technically tame, which means it only mauls people sometimes. It wears a ruffled collar and sniffs disdainfully at a trencher of roast turnips. The handler, a man with one ear and no shoes, tugs at the chain and encourages it to dance. The bear responds by rearing onto its hind legs and knocking over an entire bench. 3 guests fall backward in a screeching tangle. The bear snorts. Applause follows. You find yourself clapping, not because it was impressive, but because everyone else is clapping and the bear might notice if you aren't. The bear exits without fanfare, leaving a trail of drool and upturned chairs. Someone slips in it. Laughter returns. A dog appears under the table and begins gnawing on what might be a swanfoot. No one stops it. Then comes the fire eater. He appears in a swirl of smoke, shirtless and wild-eyed, holding 2 blazing torches and reeking of fermented apples. He bows deeply, a little too close to the candles, and immediately singes the edge of his hair. Someone hisses. Someone cheers. He proceeds undeterred. His act is as much threat as entertainment. He breathes fire in great, uneven gouts, too close to the ceiling, too close to the tapestries, too close to the queen. On his 3rd pass, he accidentally ignites the edge of a noblewoman's powdered wig. It catches like dry thatch. Screams erupt. A goblet is thrown. A servant tackles her and beats the flames out with a soaked linen napkin. The fire eater bows again, as if it was part of the show. The queen does not react. Your stomach rumbles ominously. Not a gentle nudge. A full volcanic churn. Something inside you is attempting to revolt. You try to sit straighter. The motion dislodges something unwise. You breathe through your nose. The air smells of smoke, bear, and clotted cream. You smile anyway. A troubadour begins playing a lute. It's horribly out of tune. His song is about a knight who fell in love with a goose, or possibly a ghost. No one is listening. He sings louder. Someone starts juggling knives. You blink. They weren't there a moment ago. The knives aren't well balanced, and the juggler's hands are shaking. You count 2 near impalements before he's ushered away by a limping steward. You decide not to applaud that one. At the far end of the hall, a jelly sculpture collapses. It was meant to resemble a castle, with turrets made of sugared almond and a moat of dyed wine. It slumps slowly at first like a melting glacier, then gives way entirely with a wet sigh. The sound is subtle but final. A table of clerks claps anyway, possibly in denial. One of them begins eating the wreckage with a spoon. You glance back at the high table. The king is slouched in his throne, eyes half-lidded, sipping something thick and red from a goblet the size of a helmet. The queen is still not blinking. A nobleman is retelling a story involving goats and divine punishments. You tune it out. Someone laughs too loudly near your ear. You flinch and spill a bit of wine down your sleeve. It joins the already expanding collection of stains. Your tunic now smells like lamprey, pear sauce, an existential crisis. The jester returns. He does a cartwheel, lands in the gravy, and flips backward into a crash of trenchers. The crowd roars. A man in a fur cloak drops a chicken leg in shock. A small child throws an orange at the jester's head. The jester eats it whole. You're fairly certain the feast is now devouring itself. Your stomach offers another complaint. This one more specific. You try to breathe through it. Beside you, the merchant's son lets out a slow whimpering burp. You nod at him in solidarity. He nods back, eyes glassy with meat regret. The juggler returns with flaming batons. You don't ask why. The fire eater, now shirtless and somehow more enthusiastic, joins him in a duet of madness. Someone yells, "More fire!" A toast is raised to burning away sin. You sip cautiously. It's now officially unclear what's part of the entertainment and what's just happening. You press a hand to your stomach and consider leaving. But where would you go? Outside? Into the night air filled with fog, wolves, and your shame? No, better to sit here, among the madness, and pretend that everything is fine. You're part of the show now, whether you like it or not. You smile vaguely. Someone claps for the bear again, though it's long gone, and the feast roars on. There is no formal end to the feast, no trumpet or proclamation. It simply begins to dissolve. The structure that once held it together, etiquette, courses, order, starts to sag, then collapse entirely. What was once a performance of nobility has turned into something far less controlled and far more human. You feel it in the air first. The careful laughter becomes barking. The whispers become shouts. Somewhere near the back of the hall, someone starts singing a hymn, out of tune and out of time. A man climbs onto a bench to recite a riddle and falls backward into a brazier. He's unharmed mostly, but emerges singed and triumphant, holding aloft a roasted beet like a holy relic. The riddle is forgotten. No one listens to the answer. You think it involved sheep and eternal damnation, but it's hard to say. Near the centre of the room, two merchants are having a heated argument about salt. One insists it came from the coast. The other claims it tastes of inland swamps. Neither backs down. A woman nearby fans herself with a chicken bone. No one seems alarmed. The jester reappears, this time crawling. He's licking gravy off a fallen trencher and making animal noises. You're unsure if it's a bit or a breakdown. At this point, does it matter? Your stomach has become an ominous, churning abyss. You are aware of every movement within it. You try not to breathe too deeply. The air is thick, roasted meat, sour wine, scorched wig, unwashed nobles, wet rushes bare. You begin to understand the appeal of religious fasting. At a nearby table, someone proposes a contest of riddles. Another person slams their goblet down and proposes marriage. The bride-to-be is unclear, as is their name. There is a general cheer, nonetheless. Someone else demands a duel. No weapons are drawn, but two men begin dramatically insulting each other's lineage using elaborate agricultural metaphors. You learn, to your horror, that turnip-born is an actual slur. A noble vomits directly into a silver goblet, wipes his mouth, and hands it to a servant. The servant accepts it without a word and walks away. You suspect this isn't even the worst thing they've had to carry tonight. Your respect for them deepens in proportion to your nausea. The king stands. Or at least, he attempts to. The movement is slow, deliberate, and ends with him leaning heavily on the arm of his throne. Silence falls, not because of reverence, but because everyone is trying to determine whether he's about to give a speech or pass out. He does neither. He just stares into the crowd for a moment, face unreadable, then turns and walks out. robes dragging behind him like a funeral procession. The queen remains seated, still expressionless. Perhaps she died hours ago and no one noticed. Or perhaps she's simply waiting for the floor to clear before she can unlace her corset in peace. The moment the king exits, a tension releases. It's as if the glue holding the whole event together has come unstuck. People rise from their benches with the sudden urgency of prisoners realizing the guard has left. Some head for the door, some head for more wine. A few begin dancing badly. Someone begins clapping in rhythm. Another joins in. Within moments, half the room is chanting something about St. Hubert's thighs. You don't ask. You don't want to know. You try to stand, but the movement shifts something inside you. A slosh, a threat. Your vision swims momentarily. You grip the edge of the bench, unsure whether the sweat on your brow is from the fire, the wine, or your organs beginning a slow rebellion. You mutter something about air. No one hears you. You rise again, slower this time, and begin navigating the hall like a man avoiding landmines. There's a woman asleep on a ham, a knight sobbing softly into a flagon, a child chasing a duck that may or may not have been part of the entertainment. You make it to the edge of the room. Outside the main doors, the air is a revelation. Cold, wet, glorious. You suck it into your lungs like a drowning man discovering the existence of breathing. The night is dark, moonless, and full of strange sounds, hoots, howls, the distant groan of an ox cart or a very tired bear. You lean against the stone wall, clutching your belly like it's a wound. A servant passes you, carrying what looks like an entire tray of uneaten jellied eels. He does not acknowledge your existence. You are invisible again. It's almost comforting. Inside, the singing grows louder. Or maybe it's chanting now. You hear someone yell about destiny. Then a crash. You don't flinch. You're too tired to care. You stare up at the stars, flickering points of light above the filth and chaos, and briefly wonder how many people across history have stood just like this, belly full of regret, shoes sticky with unknown fluids, questioning their life choices beneath the indifferent sky. You belch. It tastes like rennet pudding and shame. You consider never eating again. Behind you, the doors groan open, and someone stumbles out, half-dressed, laughing, holding a roast partridge in one hand and a lute in the other. He doesn't see you. He walks into the night like a legend no one asked for. You take one last look at the hall. It is glowing, flickering, pulsing with heat and noise. You know there's more food to come, probably more spectacle, maybe even dessert. But you've reached your limit. You return to the hall sometime after the shouting has died down, though you can't quite say what pulled you back. Maybe it was the chill of the air outside, or maybe it was some grim need for closure. Either way, the door creaks open and you step inside again. But the place you find is not the one you left. It's quieter now. Not silent, never silent, but subdued, as if the building itself is exhausted. Torches have burned low, casting long, greasy shadows across the walls. The feast is over in the same way a flood eventually ends, not because it chooses to, but because there's nothing left to destroy. You pause just inside the threshold, letting your eyes adjust. The warmth hits first, but it's the wrong kind. Damp, soupy, thick with the aftermath of too much food, too many bodies, and far too little ventilation. You've smelled kitchens and stables and cesspits before. This is worse. This is all of them stacked and stewing. Rats dart between the benches now, bold in their clean-up duties. One chews happily on a lump of something red and gelatinous. You hope it's a beet. You know it's not. Another rat climbs inside a discarded drinking horn and doesn't come back out. The rushes underfoot are no longer clean or even dry. They've turned to a kind of straw-coloured mulch, soaked in wine, grease, and human detritus. Your boot sinks slightly with each step. A monk lies snoring beneath the high table, clutching an empty flagon, like a child with a toy. His robes are stained. His tonsure is askew. He looks peaceful, in the way only the truly inebriated can manage, Someone has tucked a half-eaten loaf of bread under his arm, like a blanket. Servants are at work, the feast behind them, but not done. They move like ghosts, quick, silent, unacknowledged. One scrapes hardened gravy from a wooden trencher with the edge of a knife, muttering to herself in a rhythm that suggests she's done this too many times to count. Another hauls a bucket of bones toward the door, leaving a faint trail behind him that no one will bother to mop. You see a man on his knees near the hearth, not in prayer, but in pursuit of a chicken leg that's rolled under the ashes. He looks up as you pass, then returns to his quest without a word. The magic, if it ever qualified as such, is gone. You see it clearly now, the illusion stripped bare. The grand banners still hang overhead, but they're sagging, smoke-stained and riddled with cobwebs you hadn't noticed before. The gilded goblets on the high table are crusted with the dregs of clove wine and thick sediment. One has a dead fly floating in it. No one will clean them until morning. You walk past the nobleman's vomit, which is still there. The servant who had the misfortune of receiving it apparently abandoned the task. It now sits like a warning, or a monument. You recognise the jester, or what's left of him, curled in a corner beside a broken lute and a pile of orange peels. His hat is off. His bells are silent. You can't tell if he's asleep or dead. Either seems appropriate. In the centre of the room, someone is still laughing. You can't see them, just the sound, sharp and strange, echoing too brightly against the walls. It rises, then falls, then rises again, disconnected from any visible source. It's not joyful. It's not even coherent. It's the sound of a brain still dancing long after the music has stopped. A dog trots by with a string of sausages in its mouth, tail high, entirely unbothered by human affairs. You spot the remains of the jelly castle, now a formless ooze spread across the floor like a collapsed lung. A pair of clerks sit nearby, poking it with spoons, whispering as if conducting a scientific experiment. You sit on a bench near the back, careful not to touch anything more than necessary. Your hands rest in your lap. You can still feel the stickiness on your palms from earlier. You resist the urge to wipe them on your tunic. It's already ruined. From here, the great hall feels smaller, less like a stage, more like a barn someone decorated in a fever dream. You think of the stories people will tell about tonight. They'll say it was a glorious feast, a roaring success, a symbol of power and unity and culture. No one will mention the rats, or the smell, or the man asleep in the turnip bowl. The candles flicker, casting long shadows that make the room seem deeper than it is. You can hear the crackle of fat still dripping somewhere onto embers. A final reminder that the fires, like the people, have not fully gone out yet. They just no longer care who's watching. A servant brushes past you carrying a tray of half-gnawed bones. You meet eyes briefly. There's no judgment in his face, just tiredness. You nod. He nods back. In that moment, your comrade's in defeat. You take a deep breath. You regret it immediately. There's no glory here, no grandeur, only the truth of what happens when the lights dim and the nobility retreat. Behind every feast is a pile of bones. Behind every song is a silence. Behind every courtly dance is a floor slick with spilled sauce and regret. You look around once more, as if committing it to memory. Not the spectacle, but the wreckage. The part no one ever paints or sings about. This is the end of the feast, and all that remains is the mess. You don't so much find your bed as stumble into its general direction and fall onto the nearest approximation of something horizontal. Whether it's yours, borrowed, or a creative interpretation of a sleeping surface is irrelevant. It creaks alarmingly beneath you. There's straw poking through the coarse fabric. Something squishes near your shoulder, and you make the deeply mature choice not to investigate. Your body is heavy with wine, regret, and whatever they served in the third course that smelled like feet and tasted like cough syrup. You haven't removed your boots. You haven't even loosened your belt. One of your sleeves is stuck to your skin with something sticky, probably from the jelly sculpture, possibly from a monk. You roll onto your back, and stare up at the ceiling, where a spider is doing its best to survive this century. You nod at it in solidarity. For a moment, you let your mind drift back to the golden light. The first impression, the candles in their iron chandeliers, dripping wax into the faces of the honoured below, the banners swaying gently in the heat, the music, sweet and fragile, and almost dignified. There had been a moment, right at the beginning, when you thought, just for a heartbeat, that you were part of something grand. A celebration, a memory worth having. Then you remember the eel in aspic, and the monk vomiting into a ceremonial bowl, and the goose pie that exploded with a sound like a war crime. You remember the jester licking gravy off the floor. You remember how the king never looked up from his food, and how you chewed through something soft and unidentifiable while trying to smile at a minor noble's joke about cheese and sin. You think about the etiquette, the rules, the elaborate dance of gesture and posture and hierarchy that serve no purpose other than to make everyone anxious and miserable. The salt placement, the bread distribution, the wine hierarchy, the constant pressure to know things you were never taught, to smile at people who wanted nothing from you, to toast without spilling, to bow at the right angle, to exist without offence. You try to remember if anyone thanked the servants. You don't think they did. Your stomach gurgles again, long, low, accusatory. You ignore it. You're not sure whether you're about to be sick, pass out, or both. You close your eyes and feel the inside of your eyelids swirl slightly. Somewhere in the back of your throat, the ghost of rennet pudding whispers threats. You think about the bear, just for a second. The way it swatted a bench aside like it was a toy. The way no one screamed, only laughed. You wonder if it ever wanted to juggle geese for applause. You wonder if it got fed better than the kitchen boys. You're not sure what you expected tonight. Maybe some food, maybe some more, maybe, foolishly, a sliver of dignity. You showed up in borrowed clothes with a clean face and practiced manners, and in return, you got a front row seat to one of the most chaotic performances of wealth and status this side of a royal coronation. You are not improved for the experience. Your feet ache in that quiet, cruel way that promises pain tomorrow. Your head feels like it's wrapped in wool and guilt. You realise you've not spoken in an hour, and no one's noticed. That might be the worst part. You were present at a magnificent event, and your absence from it would have changed nothing. You shift on the straw mattress, trying to find a position that doesn't jab a rib or trigger a full-body cramp. The room smells faintly of mildew, turnip peel, and cheap candle wax. It's somehow comforting, familiar, honest at least, the opposite of the hall you left behind. Your thoughts begin to blur at the edges. You think about the nobles at the high table, laughing too loudly at things no one found funny. The Queen, perfectly still, perfectly silent, watching it all unfold like a marble statue with better posture. The King, encased in fur and gold and fear. You wonder if they feel full, if they feel anything. The laughter from the hall still rings faintly in your ears, distorted and far away, like the echo of a bad dream. You imagine what the rushes look like now, trampled, soaked, littered with bones and regrets. Someone will clean them up tomorrow. Not you, probably the same boy who caught the crabs. You curl slightly, tucking your knees up, clutching your own ribs like they might fall out if left unattended. You feel small, not in a pitiful way, in a cosmic way. The universe is vast and you are a flatulent speck currently digesting candied almonds and fear. You think you might cry, you don't. But the idea lingers for a moment. Then your body makes the decision for you and begins to shut down. Your arms go heavy. Your jaw slackens. Your thoughts stutter and skip. You breathe in. You smell cabbage. You breathe out. You sleep. Morning arrives not with a trumpet or sunlight or the sweet chirping of birds, but with a dull throb behind your eyes and a vague sense of being stepped on by time itself. You wake curled in the same position you collapsed in, your mouth dry, your spine misaligned, and your right boot somehow halfway off, without any memory of removing it. The straw mattress beneath you has flattened to resemble old parchment, and your tunic, still damp with unknown fluids, has taken on a crust in some areas you don't wish to investigate further. The room is colder now, the kind of cold that creeps in through stone walls and settles directly into your bones. You shiver as you sit up, slowly, carefully, like someone handling a cracked jug of spoiled milk. Your stomach is both hollow and hostile. Your tongue tastes like something pickled and forgotten in a cellar. You do not stretch, you do not sigh, you simply exist, and that is enough of a struggle for the moment. Outside, the castle stirs, not in a lively, bustling way, more like a collective groan echoing through the corridors as bodies rouse themselves from drunken heaps and start pretending to be respectable again. You can hear the scrape of boots on stone, the occasional cough, a faint retching sound that comes and goes like a passing breeze. Someone is already yelling in the kitchen. You can tell by the pitch that the bread is either burnt or missing entirely. You dress without ceremony. Your scratchy tunic from the night before has not improved with age. The sleeves cling in places they shouldn't, and the collar smells faintly of mulled wine and embarrassment. You tug on your boot, wincing as it resists before finally surrendering to your foot with a wet-sounding squelch. The laces are broken, so you tuck the ends into themselves and pretend it's intentional. You nod to a passing servant in the corridor, an older man carrying a bucket of bones and what looks like a pig's foot. He nods back with a look of hollow understanding. There's no small talk. You both know what happened. You both agree never to speak of it. The Great Hall looks different in the morning light, less magical, more like a battlefield. The banners droop in the cold, their colours muted and stained. The rushes have been swept into piles along the walls, damp and dark and infested with things you prefer not to acknowledge. The tables are stripped bare, save for a few forgotten goblets, a half-chewed fig, and the broken neck of a lute. A pig is eating what remains of the jelly sculpture. You don't know where the pig came from. You don't ask, you simply walk around it, pretending not to see its snout disappear into a mound of glistening pink goo. You catch someone's eye across the hall, an apprentice scribe maybe, or a stable boy dressed up for the occasion. He raises a hand in a limp wave. You recognise him as the person who watched you trip over your own feet during the third toast. You nod once and move on, your shared shame binding you together forever in quiet, wordless alliance. The smell in the hall is worse now. Gone are the masking scents of roast meat and sweet wine. What lingers is the aftermath, sour sweat, stale beer, and the unmistakable tang of digestive regret. You take shallow breaths as you pass a pile of discarded trenchers being shoveled into a sack by a boy with dead eyes. You pass the kitchen and immediately regret it. The doorway blasts heat and smoke, punctuated by the clatter of pots and the occasional scream. A cook hurls something unidentifiable into a fire and curses the name of a noble who requested almond milk at dawn. You hear the phrase peacock replucking and pick up your pace. Back outside, the castle grounds are quieter. The festivities are over, the hangovers have begun, and the servants have retreated to their tasks like ants rebuilding a trampled hill. The bear is gone. The jester is gone. The king is probably still asleep in a bed the size of a fishing boat, surrounded by velvet and gilt. You find a corner by a crumbling wall and sit down on a rock that's slightly less cold than the rest. You lean your head back and close your eyes. The sun is out, sort of. The sky's greyish, the breeze sharp, and everything smells faintly of old cabbage. You try to remember the feast, not just what happened, but how it felt. The flicker of candlelight, the music, the moment the first dish was unveiled, the awe of it all, but it's already fading, blurred by wine, by fatigue, by the knowledge that none of it was really meant for you. You were just there, a prop in the background, a seat to be filled. You think of the food, the lampreys, the peacock, the rennet pudding. You wonder what parts of you will recover and what parts never will. You think about the nobility laughing too loud, the servants moving like shadows, the silent queen, the bishop who spilled gravy on his Bible. It plays back in fragments, out of order, none of it quite real anymore. You sigh through your nose and feel the warmth of it against your chapped lips. A rooster crows. Somewhere nearby, someone drops a plate. It shatters, and no one reacts. This was a feast, and now it isn't. You push yourself up, stretch just enough to feel something pop in your back, and start walking. Not quickly. There's nowhere to be. Just forward. Just away from the mess, from the performance, from the pig eating jelly, and the memory of a goose pie that fought back. By the time you reach the gate, the feast already feels like a story someone told you. An odd one, with too many characters, not enough logic, and a deeply unsatisfying resolution. Sleep well, and try not to dream of aspic.